Welcome to the World Nomads podcast, delivered by World Nomads, the travel lifestyle and insurance brand. It's not your usual travel podcast. It's everything for the adventurous, independent traveler.
Welcome to the World Nomads podcast, and our destination for this episode is Chile or Chile.
Chile country, we know what it is. It's that long, narrow strip down the western coast of South America. It's got that Andes on the east, which is why it doesn't go inland much more, and the Pacific Ocean to the west, and bordering with Peru, Bolivia, Argentina, and of course the Drake Passage.
All big names.
They are.
All big names. In this episode, we'll learn about the arid Atacama Desert in the north. Here we go. Head to the wild south to explore trekking, chat Chilean wine, and find out about the mummies that are older than those in Egypt.
No. Okay.
Apparently.
All right.
Firstly, what's your quiz question?
All right. By the time everyone hears this, it'll be too late. But put this in the calendar for next year. I've just heard about this one. Every year in the first week of July is the Mango Festival. Mango eating competitions. Wear a raincoat. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Mango quizzes and other sort of mango related competitions. This happens because in the area where this city is, there are more than 50 varieties of mangoes are grown there. But what's the city? Where's the Mango Festival?
Well, I guess you'll tell us at the end of the episode.
I will.
Chad-carey has a company called chimu-adventures, and they offer itineraries to Latin America. However, Phil, it's an Australian-based company.
Okay.
And Chad, how'd that come about?
Yeah, well, look, it's Latin America and the polar regions, really. But I guess how it came about is Greg, my business partner, and I were actually working in London at the time, and I wanted to go and explore South America. So I didn't really know what to do. I looked around, tried to find a few tours, just couldn't find trips that I liked for that sort of region of the world. So Greg had just come back from living over there, and we sort of, after quite half a dozen beers or so, decided it'd be a great idea to start a business plan as I travel and actually start up a tour operating business to Latin America. So that's what I travelled around for about 6 months, did a bit of that, met a lot of people, tied up a bit of a business plan, got a few angel investors involved and things like that, and got back to Australia and we just sort of gave it a shot.
Now, this podcast is on Chile in particular, so what are the options to explore Chile? Are they endless?
Yeah, Chile's sort of got one of the longest coastlines in the world, so, even though it's a thin country, there's a huge, diversity in geography and sort of different sites that you can see along the length of that coast, from deserts up in the north down to the sort of wilds of Patagonia at the bottom. So there's a huge amount of variety all through Chile.
Tell me about, and I'm hopeless with pronunciations, the Atacama Desert.
Yeah, no, perfect, spot on.
Oh.
So that's you nailed it.
It was a free, that was a free.
I got to tell you, Chad, that's the first time she's ever got one right.
I have read there are places in that desert where it has never recorded one drop of rain.
Well, yes, that's true. It's the driest place on Earth, except for a little region called the Dry Valleys in Antarctica. But other than that, it's the driest place on Earth, and and so. It's obviously got these dramatic landscapes. There's not a lot of vegetation. Sort of the Valley of the Moon is one of them that's quite famous. There's actually quite a few valleys of the moon around that whole region into Bolivia as well, because they almost are, it's the closest you get to having a lunar landscape. But it's also one of the best stargazing spots on the planet. And in fact, there's a lot of observatories and things in that region, and ones that visitors can go and see as well.
So do you encourage trekking through that area?
Trekking, probably not so much just there. Actually, on the north, or just near on the Argentinian side, there's probably a few better treks. But I think you're better off going around in a four-wheel drive vehicle. To get around the different spots. There's quite a big distance between them, and because it's so barren, sometimes between those spots, it's not sort of conducive to trekking as much. But it's just really getting to the geysers, and get into. Some of the lakes there. You've got a whole string of lakes that come through some of those regions, just different colours in every spot. You've got flamingos through them, all sorts of wildlife. So it's pretty spectacular. For me, the best thing to do is just at night, just to lay out and gaze up at the stars. I said, the sort of the air is so clear there that you can see the Milky Way so clearly. It's very bright, almost blindingly bright. So, it's quite a lot to see up there.
Tell me about Patagonia too. I've heard, like, everybody talks about Patagonia when they mention Chile or Chile. I've heard it's expensive. As a world nomad, as somebody that wants to go off the beaten track, can you experience it without sort of breaking the bank?
Yes, and I mean, look, there are sort of notorious places that are expensive, like Torres del Paine National Park, which is sort of the famous one there. And even for that, you can do it on a bit of a shoestring. There's these little refugios, these little camps that you can stay in and do it there. But even doing those, for on a sort of shoestring budget, it can be quite expensive. But Torres del Paine is just a small portion of Patagonia, which really sort of goes from the Lake District between Chile and Argentina all the way down to the bottom of South America generally. And all through that area, that Lake District area is quite amazing in itself. But there's a whole bunch of untouched. Reasonably untouched parks through that area that just aren't visited by the average traveller. In fact, the Tompkins, Doug and Christine, I think it is Tompkins, who were the founders of Esprit, and they also worked at Patagonia as well, and were obviously quite wealthy. Doug Tompkins just died recently, and he donated all their land to Chile to create a huge national park through there. It's only recently become a national park. So, and that still, is reasonably unexplored, and not many tourists have actually been there. So there's all these regions that you can go to through Patagonia, which can cost too much. You can camp, you can trek, you can do those sorts of things, and sort of live off a shoestring pretty easily.
Is there a better time of year to go and do that?
Oh, definitely, the southern hemisphere summer. You don't want to go there in winter, especially down towards the bottom, the sort of Tierra del Fuego, which is the, right down the bottom. Outside of, you've got sort of about October to April in the region's okay, but outside of that, it's way too cold, snow and everything like that.
Does it feel like, Phil, you'll be able to answer this question, does it feel like South America's a real go-to place at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually calling it a couple of times in conversations. I've named it as like the Southeast Asia of, the 2000s. Back in the 70s, everybody went off and went exploring what was then unexplored in Western terms, Southeast Asia. And I think that's happening to South America now. It's really sort of starting to... travel to there is just booming. It's just growing leaps and bounds every year. So, yeah, I think it's like, the new travel frontier.
And what would your reaction to that be, Chad?
Oh, I think so too. As you say, Asia sort of was that for quite some time. But, it's become the sort of, most of Asia now, has become a little commoditized. And to that extent, there isn't sort of that exploration component to it as much. For me, really, the only sort of two continents where you can get that experience now, Africa and South America. And Africa obviously has a few safety issues with it, and South America did so in the past a little bit, but these days, with the exception of maybe Venezuela, the whole continent's relatively safe. So you can still sort of have that adventure component while still feeling safe. So I think that's why it's such a massive attraction at the moment.
Yeah, Venezuela, I'm also quoted as saying you've got to be crackers to go Caracas. It's a dangerous place. But look, so what are, companies like you, what are you doing to try and make sure that South America doesn't become commoditized?
Yeah, I think there's, as things become more popular, it will happen to a certain extent, at least in the popular areas. But I think the great thing with South America compared to, say, Asia, which is so densely populated, in Asia, South America has so many sort of vast untouched areas which are still relatively off the beaten track. So, I still think it's got a considerable time to go before all those areas become well trodden, that's for sure.
That's good to hear. And just a bit more information on that donation of land for national parks that Chad mentioned from Douglas Tompkins. He was the co-founder of the clothing brands Esprit and the North Face. It is, Phil, the largest ever made in Chile's history. 407,625 hectares, or 1 million acres.
Wow. Sadly, though, Douglas died in 2015 when he was 72 in a kayaking accident in southern Chile.
Now, later in the episode, Phil, we'll catch up with World Nomads Milly, who spent time in Chile. Milly went to Chile. And
I've been waiting for that. I've been holding that in reserve. I've been waiting for that.
And she'll talk about the walk that she did on the W Trek. That's in the south of Chile. This is Steph, who's going to chat to us about northern Chile. Did you like that one? Milly went to Chile, Steph?
Very, very good. There's lots of good Chile jokes, I think. So, yeah.
Oh, are there? Do you know any others?
Well, I mean, every time it gets cold here, it's chilly in Chile. I think that's the best one. Yeah.
Of course, yeah. Chile.
Good dad joke.
All right. So you've written an article that we'll share in show notes, but you say while the south of the country is best known for its lush forests and the glacier-riddled mountains that Milly will chat about, northern Chile is in many ways very opposite. Can you explain why or how?
Yeah, I think what people don't realize about Chile until they get here is it's one of the most extreme countries I think there is in South America. It has got so many different landscapes, and yeah, while you've got in the south, you've got the Andes mountains, and you've got the glaciers, and you've got lots of hiking and things like that. In the north, it's basically the Atacama Desert. It's an extraordinary landscape, and it's got a surprising number of things to do for something that you'd imagine would be particularly barren, really. So yeah, it's a complete contrast.
We chatted earlier to Chad, who said that the desert is known for stargazing.
Yes, and also stargazing.
Stargazing is what I was trying to say. Have you experienced that and the Milky Way in its purest form?
Yeah, when I was in San-Pedro-de-Atacama, which is the best-known town in the north of Chile, and it's considered the best place, I think, on the planet to go stargazing, which is because of the high altitude, the fact that it's so dry, so you don't get very many clouds, and also because there's very little light pollution, because there's hardly any towns and things there. And yeah, I went on a stargazing tour, and it is just incredible, the kind of quality and the purity of the stars that you see when you're there. It's really such a recommended activity for anyone who does get to go there.
Well, you've got a great photo in the article that you've written for us. So what else is up north that's different to the south?
Well, I guess one of my favourite things when I was there, which was last year, is the mummies, the Chinchorro mummies, which are actually the oldest on the planet.
Predating the Egyptian mummies?
Yeah, they actually predate them by 2,000 years.
Oh, just a bit then.
And it's fascinating because no one's heard of them either. This is what strikes me so much about northern Chile. Like, they've got the oldest mummies on the planet and no one knows. So how were they uncovered? Well, basically, they're called the Chinchorro mummies because that's the name of the beach that you find on Arica. Arica is the northernmost town or city, really, in Chile. And basically, some of the most famous ones were found in the foundations of a house that was being converted into a hotel. And they started digging, and they just found, I think it's 32 mummies they found in the foundations of this house. And they couldn't do anything about it. They couldn't move them because they're in such a delicate state. So now you can actually go and visit this house and go and see the mummies still lying in the ground, still just kind of staring up at you. It's really fascinating museum to visit.
Was mummification part of ancient culture in Chile, or was that a bit of a surprise?
It was a bit of a surprise. What's so interesting about the Chinchorro mummies is that they actually, because of the climate, because of how dry it is in the desert, a lot of them actually were mummified naturally. And they don't know whether that kind of predates the mummification, like the practices that then the Chinchorro people adapted. But yeah, they've survived so well because it's such a dry climate that they've just been buried in the sand and survived to this day. Well,
look, we're in northern Chile now, so the indigenous culture, the local culture, how does it differ from, I mean, because you've got the Andes chain going all the way up. But how does Chilean culture differ from, say, Peruvian?
Well, This is another interesting thing about Chile, that I think there's quite a few misconceptions about the culture here. Because if you're in Santiago, it's very European. You could feel like you were practically in any city in Europe. But the north of Chile has a lot in common with Peru and with Bolivia. The Andes has a very, very strong culture. You've got the indigenous Aymara and Quechua-speaking cultural groups and things like that. So when you're in the north, particularly around San-Pedro-de-Atacama, Arid, there's a real sense of the Andean culture that you can see a lot in the clothes that people wear, and also in the adobe buildings that they have there as well. Sort of mud houses that you see a lot more in Peru and Bolivia than you do in other parts of Chile.
Okay, let's leave Steph there for the time being, and we'll come back to her to chat wine. And Phil, we uncovered a cultural war in our episode on Finland, didn't we?
Yep.
Chile and Peru have their own battle going on, which Steph will tell us about. But we will catch up with our own world nomad, Millie, who went to Chile later in the episode. But she's not the only employee that loves travel. I did a quick whip around some of the other staff to see what they've been up to.
The last trip I had was to Central America, Costa Rica, Florida and Panama. I was actually over there to visit a sea turtle charity that we sponsor through the Footprints Network. After the work trip, I actually went up to Canada to visit a few mates up there and went skiing in Whistler, so that was always good.
My last big trip was Central America, so that was Mexico, then Guatemala, Nicaragua, Costa Rica, then jumped down to Colombia as well. It's amazing. I think it's got a really new tourist scene in a lot of places, and everyone's really excited to show you around and stuff. Had a really good time.
Cool. So what's next? You've got to be sitting here in the World Nomads headquarters in Sydney thinking, where can I go?
Yeah, I'm really keen to go to Seoul, I think. I'm planning that for next year.
All right, well, you need to listen to the podcast on South Korea.
Yep, definitely get around it.
It was family-based, so we went home to New Zealand, UK in October. We're doing a bit of a road trip around the southwest, so that's fun. There'll be something new for us both.
My last trip was to Bali and the Gili Islands in Indonesia. So I was working remotely from a co-working space there, but also managed to sneak away off to the Gili Islands to have a bit of a snorkel and check out the local scene.
Well, my next trip next week will be taking my kids skiing, which will be the first time they'll see snow, which is exciting. Most of my travels these days are pretty close to home, camping and doing little mini adventures. It's instilling our kids the love of travel, so that's where we're at right now.
And I've just returned from Japan, while Phil, you're planning a trip to
Singapore. Going to try Singapore.
We don't just walk the walk, we talk the talk. Now, you haven't been to Chile, but you rate their wine, which...
Yep.
Look, seriously, I struggle with that because I haven't tasted a good Chilean wine. So we'll get back to Steph, chat wine, find out why Chile and Peru don't see eye to eye on a drink called Pisco. Then we'll be back.
I'm a big fan of Chilean wine, so I think that they're working their hardest to get the good stuff sent out of the country and people to see how tasty it is.
You say you keep all the good stuff in Chile. You're not sending is that right?
Well, the funny thing is as well that I don't think the Chilean general population actually knows that much about wine. But it feels like, you can get some really, really good wine here for, I don't know, like $5-6, and it's really good quality. And if you go and visit the vineyards as well, like, wow. In terms of Pisco is basically, it's a type of brandy that they make from the grapes. And it's quite an interesting drink because there's a very controversial discussion, let's put it, between Peru and Chile as to who actually had the first Pisco. And I think most of the time things go in favor of Peru, but Chile has its own place called Pisco Elqui, where they still make Pisco to this day. And if you go and visit, there's some really great little boutique. They're called Pisquerias. And you can go and visit them. You can go and get taken around the facilities. You can go and try some Pisco, and it's very strong, so be careful. And one of my favorites, there's this place called Los Nichos, which is basically, I think it's the oldest still functioning Pisco distillery in Chile, and it's in a really beautiful old colonial house, and the Pisco is really, really good quality. So it's definitely worth a visit.
Okay, well, let's put this argument to rest at the end of the episode. Phil, are you up for a quick tasting between you and I and a few others? Let's have a party.
I've nicked down to the bottle shop and I've got a bottle of Chilean wine, so I'm up for a tasting.
Okay, so just a reminder, on record, me, not a fan, you...
I've had some good ones.
Welcome, Milly-mcgrath, back to the studio. Last time we chatted to you, it was about New Zealand and you had a shocking cold. Are you well enough to chat today?
Oh, yes, I certainly am.
And why wouldn't you be? You've just spent 3 months in South America.
I have.
How was it?
Yeah, it was awesome. Absolutely unreal. But I'd probably say the highlight was Torres del Paine in Patagonia. So that was the 5-day, 100-kilometre trek around the W circuit.
Yeah.
So we started the trek, I think the last day of April, which is just about officially winter in Torres del Paine. So it's called the W circuit because a bird's eye view of the park, you can, you actually have to backtrack a few times, obviously, as a W. So you start at a place called Paine Grande, then you walk up to Glacier Grey, then you come back the next day and you walk up to the middle of the W, which is the Francis Valley, and then you start walking back down the other side of the W until you get to the base of the towers. So there's these 3 really famous granite pillars that are they sit at the base of a lake, and they're really beautiful, and all the photos of Torres del Paine that you see will be tiny person, big landscape with these big pillars.
Right. Seen them, yes.
Yep. The funny part is that part of the W track is really difficult if there's been a lot of snow and ice. And we ended up doing this whole, I think it was like 75 kilometres of the W track, and on the last day we were supposed to go up to see I think they call it Las Torres. And when we got about 100 metres shy of the summit, it was just completely hard-packed snow, so icy, I took one step and almost slipped over. So I just went, nah, not worth it.
Really?
Yeah, it was that bad.
Okay, so
did you get to see them? No, did you see them?
No.
By 100 metres?
Oh, it was... So there was this trail. We actually saw 3 other people going up there.
Yep.
They were probably moving a millimetre a second, slipping and sliding everywhere. And it's quite a treacherous drop off the side. No helicopter evacuation up here.
Ooh.
So you were just too piss weak to carry on and do it then?
Full disclosure, Mark was powering ahead. He had his trekking poles dug into the snow, but me, I'm clumsy. If you know me, I'll trip over anywhere, over my shoelaces.
But she's being a responsible traveller, Phil.
That's right. It's looking after herself. No helicopter evacuation, as you say. Yeah, you've got to take care. That's right.
Advocate here. Yeah. So any advice out of that you would give to anyone that's considering trekking the W track?
If you haven't done overnight hikes and carried all of your gear, our packs were about 16 to 22 kilos. Mm-hmm. You have to carry all of your food, all of your sleeping gear, all of your clothes for the full 5 days, especially if you're in winter. When the season is open, when it's not freezing cold, which is actually all the time in Patagonia, you have the option to stay in these things called refugios, which is like a cabin, and you've got a bed and you've got the option to buy food, beer, sit by the fire. Really lovely.
So they have some facilities.
They do. And you can actually pre-book a tent. So when you roll into camp at night, a tent is already established for you, but you really do have to book in advance. If you're not an experienced hiker, go during, Patagonian summer, book a refugio or a pre-established tent or something and enjoy those comforts, because Mark and I have done a few overnight hikes and honestly the W track was so unbelievably difficult. Those Patagonian winds are worse than you can imagine. They are just as bad as they say they are. And when you're carrying a 15 to 20 kilo bag on your back, you will fall over. Yeah. And it's very serious.
Well, it's like having a sail on your back. I mean, it's catching the wind. And then as well as off balance. But I was being cheeky before. It's not. It's like you are an experienced hiker and outdoors woman. You are off all the time in Australia, so it's not like you're a complete novice, right?
Yeah. I'd been to Nepal earlier this year, so I'm not the best, but.
You're not a novice.
Yeah, and we're reasonably fit, but I'd probably just say the W track is really popular. It's becoming more popular, and it is more difficult than a lot of articles are proving online.
Okay.
So winter is treacherous. really worth it because we had no one else on the trails, whereas we'd heard from other people during summer. You're walking next to hundreds of people.
Tell us about the mouse epidemic.
So there's a mouse epidemic in Patagonia at the moment. I'd heard from someone that it had started a few months back. I think maybe because irresponsible travellers are leaving their food all over the place or not disposing of their garbage. Because you're supposed to carry all of your rubbish out with you.
Yeah.
So people have obviously been leaving that around the campsites or in the little huts where you can get some shelter. These mice will come out at night and they will go through your food. You'll find them in the tent. They nibbled a hole in the top of our tent and dropped onto one of our sleeping bags one of the nights. But one of the best pieces of advice that we got was, don't take anything with you into your tent at night. That includes a little tube of paw ointment to keep your lips moisturised, hand cream, nothing, no food, anything, because the mice will actually sniff out anything that has a bit of a smell on it.
What about condoms?
Yeah, I don't know if there'll be any of that on the W track. We're pretty tired. But I would include condoms in that list.
You would, yeah.
Well, they're like mouse sleeping bags.
Well, I was just thinking they're lubricated just like a paw ointment.
Sure.
Anyway, yeah, sure.
Okay.
It was a reasonable point, Kim.
No, I absolutely.
You agree?
Yeah.
All right.
This is how disappointing it would be if you suddenly discovered that your condoms had a hole bitten in it by a tiny mouse at the most inconvenient moment.
So no jokes aside, how did you keep your food away from the mice? Because I suspect if they got into it, that'd be a big issue.
So what we did, we used this cord and lock that we got from Kathmandu. We rigged that up. So we connected it to all of our bags, plus the pots and stuff that we'd been cooking with. It's a really strong chain. So we hung that from a really thick branch. And then we had 2 backpacks, 1 big bag of food and the pots. You attached all of them, and then I had to help pick it up while Mark quickly latched it on, and we did the combination and attached that to the tree. But one other thing you can do is get a stick and sit it in the bottom of the rope so that carries all of the weight of all of your bags. If you don't do that, a lot of people were hanging their bags from the rafters in the huts. That's actually where the mice are the most active.
And if you didn't mouse-proof your food and you lost it, no shops around?
Oh, no, I'm not sharing my food. We're rationing.
Excellent. How to mouse-proof your food. Thanks, Millie. And while Millie was away, she and her partner Mark got engaged, and they'll marry in March 2019, which is next year. Congratulations, guys. That's awesome. It's always sweet when someone gets engaged.
If I have to be married, so should everybody else.
Phil, what's making travel news? Segue out of that.
Yeah, that one. Just get straight out of that one. There's a second volcano which has erupted in the Galapagos Islands. Remember we were talking about the other one last episode. The Sierra Negra volcano on the island of Isabela is spewing again fountains of lava and plumes of ash. Spewing. I don't know.
It does look quite spectacular when you see footage of nighttime when it's spewing.
Yes. I'm spewing about it, mate. Yeah. Anyway, but this one is on the largest island, which is inhabited, but not at that end of it. So about 50 people have been evacuated from the area, and of course the volcano is off limits to visitors at the moment. We've been speaking about Finland recently as well. US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin will meet for the first summit that's going on at the moment around about this time in Helsinki. So if you're going to be there, watch out for those motorcades and expect very strict security around town. Hope they don't spoil the joint. Speaking of Singapore, they may start turning back foreign visitors who don't have the required vaccinations. So they want to protect the small city-state from things like Ebola, Middle East respiratory syndrome, bird flu, etc. So it's not all the time, but they may just go, okay, there's a bit of a health emergency going on. If you're not vaccinated, you're back on the plane and you're going back to where you came from. So make sure your vaccinations are up to date. Italy's cracking down on vendors selling fake goods on the beaches this summer. Tourists could be fined €7,000. The tourists, fined for buying counterfeit products. Obviously, beaches in Europe are hotspots and, regularly strolled around by all those vendors who largely come from West Africa and Bangladesh, selling, all that sort of cheap and cheerful so-called designer goods, sunglasses, all that sort of stuff. But the Italian government minister responsible for tourism says he wants to create safe beaches and prevent their trade, as well as stop the sale of counterfeit goods. Interesting tactic in two ways. One, it's kind of targeting people who are probably could do with a hand, like the immigrants, like West Africans and Bangladeshis, that are trying to make a buck. But the other, more interesting tactic is targeting the tourists, finding the tourists for buying the stuff. Interesting. €7,000 if you're caught doing that.
That's a lot of money.
And one more sort of just before we finish up. In Nepal, the government has launched an official special investigation unit that'll be looking at the activities of more than 500 expedition, trekking and helicopter companies in the country who are accused of corruption and price fixing through unnecessary and fictitious helicopter rescues to defraud the travel insurance industry out of millions of dollars. Yeah, it's been a problem for all insurance companies, and we have certainly been aware of it. So it's good to see that the Nepalese government is actually going to launch an investigation and try and cut it out. The problem with it, of course, is everybody's premiums go up if there's fraudulent claims being put in. So
do the right thing.
Yep, just trying to help everybody out. There you go. That's my news.
Well done. Still to come. I love it when I say well done to you. It sounds so patronising, doesn't it? That was really good, Phil.
Thanks, kid.
Still to come, our Chilean wine tasting. But now, earlier in the podcast, we spoke with our very own world nomad, Milly, who went to Chile, and she did the W track. And this man, his name, Phil? Guillermo actually met Milly.
Our Milly?
Our Milly, yeah. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how are you?
We're well. Now, do you remember meeting Milly? Because she certainly has fond memories of you.
Yes, I remember her boyfriend. If I'm not wrong, they came on May 30th to my shop, and then they were the last people allowed to go to do W trek without a guide, because in low season there is a different story. You need to go with a guide, but they were lucky. They were kind of the last customer to go without one, and they had a very good time. So it's not easy to forget those kind of people.
It's not easy to forget idiots who want to go
very
out
brave,
of season. Yeah.
Very brave people.
So you own a rental gear company, and does it specifically cater for people that are doing that particular trek?
Yes, yeah. All kind of activity as well around the Torres-del-Paine National Park, all that area.
I guess the gear is important. As we learned from Milly, it's really quite cold.
Yeah, I remember it was very cold those days. Sub-zero temperatures, about -5, -6 degrees during the night. And during the day, probably not higher, about 4 or 5 degrees. It's pretty chilly down here.
Pretty chilly in Chile.
I knew it had to happen, right?
Got it in. But the great thing is then, though, Phil, obviously from a practical point of view, you don't have to carry all that cold gear around with you.
Yep, you can go get it from our friend Guillermo. A little free plug for you, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. What's your rental company called?
It's called Rental-Natales.
Also, you apparently have invented a new camping tool that you're trying to launch into the market. What is it?
It's still a secret. It's it's a product that it helps to insert and remove pegs from the ground. I'm working on it, and I hopefully I'm trying to license it to Kathmandu. So if there's someone from Kathmandu listening there, that would be great.
So did you deliberately make your voice sound, or your accent, very thick? So that
it's a secret.
We didn't know what it is.
I'm going to go back to Spanish because it's a secret.
Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
How many times have you done the W track?
Countless. I was a tour guide before I opened up my shop. Before that, I went to the park as a tourist. So I've been there a lot of times, and I lost track already.
What is it that appeals to you? What is it that you like about the W track?
everything. The entire park is really beautiful. You have to come down here sometime. And every day is different. Every time you go is different. I went on last Friday, I went with my girlfriend, and we saw a huge puma, like 5 meters away from us, next to our car. And then the next day, we have to go back to town, and then on Sunday we went back again to the park. And I would love to be there right now. Now in winter, it's really, really beautiful. Long nights, short days. Special. It's very nice to do a lot of photography, see wildlife, and not to see many people as in summer. It's a little bit too crowded, like January, February, but it's really nice. And you can go 100 times in a year, and every time it's going to be different. So it's a nice place to live and work here.
Well, you said it looks beautiful in winter, but apparently you're without water at the moment because it's so cold your pipes are frozen.
Yeah, who told you that?
I have eyes and ears everywhere. It was really...
I have no water in my house, and I'm not in my office either.
So what do you do?
Well, old school shower or visited friends. This morning I couldn't even open my car because the doors were frozen and stuck.
But it's part of the adventure. You love it.
Yeah, it's really nice. Yeah. At least the air is pure, so no contamination, no smog. It's nice.
Now, you mentioned you and your girlfriend went out the other day and you saw a puma. Millie told us that you actually took some photos. Are you happy to share a couple with us that we can put in our show notes?
Yes.
And thanks for looking after Millie and Mark.
Yeah, no worries.
Actually, he was very secretive about that camping tour, wasn't he?
I know. It must be good.
It must be very good. We'll look out for that. And I can't wait to see those pics of the pumas. All right, time for the answer to your quiz question.
As I said, by the time everybody hears this, it'll be over. But this first week of July is time for a mango festival in which city? New Delhi. It kind of makes sense, really. You know, you use mango in chutneys and in curries and things like that. But they grow 50 different varieties of mango around that district of India. So how much fun would that be, a mango festival in India? It would go off.
How tasty.
It would be very good indeed.
Very tasty. All right, now we've mentioned Chilean wine in the podcast. I'm not a fan. I've said that. I've said it probably 4 times now. Phil is a massive fan of Chilean wine. So he's gone and bought us a bottle. That's it. And we're going to do a bit of a taste test with the staff. Welcome to the podcast studio. Yay!
All right. And actually, it smells fantastic.
Yeah, already I can smell it. Are we all wine connoisseurs or no?
Drinkers.
Yeah, drinkers. There you go. Grab one.
I'm not going to go all, sommelier on you. But...
Yeah, all right.
I don't want to catch a cue.
Okay, I'm going to smell it. I smell a hint of passing out.
A hint of blackout.
A hint of blackout, yeah.
Okay, this is Purifé, and it's a grape. It's actually a French grape, but they grow it extensively in Chile. By the way, this is the bloke at the bottle shop talking, not me.
Yeah, exactly.
And the name of the grape is the Carmenere, which is...
It's probably not.
How'd you like me now? The Carmenere.
How'd you like me now?
Or in Australia, Carmenere.
What are we thinking?
Goes all right.
Goes all right? Yeah. Well, I'm okay.
What do you reckon?
I'm going to say it's smooth.
What do you think it's like? It's
like
it's like a Shiraz.
Shiraz. It's like a Shiraz.
But,
hang on, it got me on the back end.
With a big a lot of fruit in there.
Yeah,
a lot of sweet sort of berry fruit in there.
Bit Pinot-y.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. So what do you okay, how much would you pay for a bottle of that?
All right, let me have another taste.
Have another taste. How much would you pay for a bottle of that? This is the way I buy wine. If I drink a wine and go, oh, that's a really expensive wine, but it's only $5, then buy it because it's a bargain. So how much would you pay for that one?
$15.
No, don't buy that one then.
Well,
it's a bit more than that.
Have a guess. 25? What's your guess, Sean? 40?
Yeah, I was going to say around the 40.
Yeah, around the 40.
Yeah, you can.
You
can spot the wine snobs. They're right. $40. $40 Australian, which is what, just over $30 US.
Well, it's a lot more expensive than what Steph was suggesting. You can get good ones in Chile for $6.
That's right. But
you got ripped off.
But this is imported into Australia, so, it's got all those travel costs on it as well.
Or approximately 20,000 Chilean peso.
Oh, thank you, Alison. Well, that wraps up our episode on, where are we? Chile.
Wait, I have a question. Where's the Pisco?
Where's the Pisco?
We should have done that.
Yeah, we should have done a Pisco. Oh.
Well, after this bottle, we'll be fairly Piscoed anyway.
We will be Piscoed.
Oh, here she comes. Hang on.
Emily's got to have a taste.
Have a taste, Emily.
You've got to taste it with a view to how much would you pay for this bottle?
How much would you pay for a bottle of that?
She's thinking.
$30.
She's on the mark. Well, as I was saying, it wraps up the episode on Chile. Please subscribe, rate, share on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher and iHeartRadio, and contact us by emailing podcasts@worldnomads.com. Now, also...
we're on Virgin Australia International. So
hey,
if you're
we need
flying,
to toast that.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this whilst you're flying somewhere, you lucky things.
Yeah, cheers.
And listen to a few more episodes.
Exactly, cheers. Enjoy your break. Now, next week, the third of our bonus episodes featuring amazing nomad Dan Pearson. What's he done?
He walked across Cuba.
We'll hear his story next week. Bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
The World Nomads Podcast. Explore your boundaries.